Tony Gigo, he's a superstar. He was a superstar at number 1 in the halves, in fact all over the park. He's totally unflappable, cooler than a coolest iceberg in the Arctic when he's under pressure, and he can do what other players can't even dream of doing. Some of his highlight reels on YouTube are absolute sensations. Go and watch them. As for next year, well, I think the future's looking bright. Greg Bird's coming back home. Sam Moa's coming, just a man, not the island. So that's looking really good. I think we can organise the team a bit better and hopefully go on and win something next year. Welcome to paradise.
Bernie T knows, don't argue.
Hashtag slaughterhouse visit.
Right, well, welcome to paradise indeed, Mark. That was absolutely phenomenal. Oh, mate.
I thought he was in like a Catalan karaoke bar for roasting it.
That is top work, my friend. Thank you very, very much indeed. That was, first of all, detailed and a great insight into your perspective on the Catalan season. The fact that you had the temerity to produce a better put together show than we normally do with the music underneath it and talking over the top, that says a great deal, and a good choice of music. And yeah, welcome to paradise. Thank you, Alan. What did you make of Catalan this year, Marcus?
Well, Al talked to the game of a season of 2 halves, but it didn't really start that well for the Catalan Dragons in the first initial couple of weeks of the season, but by the halfway point of the season they were sat in second place. They were looking good and they were actually seeing some form emerge from the big name imports like Carney, like the Gift Stewart and like the Fat Touchy Taylor. It ended though really badly, didn't it? They only had 1 win from their last 12 matches, some real hammerings in that run. 28-point defeat by Widnes, probably the lowest moment right at the end of the regular season. They'd given up and thrown the towel in on the top 4 when they were still in the race for that, definitely. There was a 44-point thrashing from Hull FC, a couple of 20-point reversals to Wigan as well, including on their big 10th anniversary celebration game in Catalan. Yeah. So overall, it was probably about right with that they ended up with a pure 50% win-loss record.
There you go.
And this is a good stat. An average of 24 points scored and 24 points conceded.
It puts them back right, doesn't it?
Yeah. So for them to finish mid-table like they did, 6th out of 12 in theory overall. Even when they were winning, only a couple of times did they look flowing and glorious. I think that was what I felt through the whole season. Away wins over Huddersfield and Hull were probably the highlights, and actually a record of 7 away wins will probably be taken as the biggest positive out of this Super League season for them, along with the emergence of young players like Lucas Albert and Fuad Yahar. They're genuine Super League level talents now, I think, even though young Albert is very, very young. The only ever present, Al touched on him, the only ever present this year was also one of the most unheralded and underappreciated players of the 2016 campaign. It is Julian Busquets. He got no votes in the SLP Dream Team. He was the only player available for voting for that got no votes. This was despite him being the 3rd best of the 8 prop nominees in metres per carry, tied second in the 8 props in tries scored, 2nd fewest in those 8 props of errors made, joint 1st in fewest penalties conceded, and 2nd best for tackle success rate. So he was better in almost every key stat category than the rest of those 8 people who all got more votes than him. Wow. Jason Battieri, he's the other player I want to highlight. We both talked about him as the most underrated player of the season in our views. Making over 30 tackles and over 100 metres per game for a player who gets spelled in games, and he's an undersized middle, isn't he? The stats that I've found on him say he's less than 6 foot tall and less than 15 stone in weight. And he's playing in the middle, full time, tackling his arse off and running hard. I think it's very impressive. One stat the Dragons did lead the way in 2016 was 40-20 kicks. They had 8 this season.
Wow. There you go. Yeah, it was a season that promised much, but ultimately delivered disappointment for me. When you look at some of the names that came in this year to augment this up-and-coming, this groundswell of young talent at Catalan as well. And one young player that has had some game time that we didn't mention was Alrix da Costa, the young hooker as well, who I think is perhaps not in the same level quite yet as people like Fuad Yahar and young Albert, but is definitely coming up on the rails as well. My question is, how much commitment do some of these Australian players have when they come over to Catalan, and was that borne out towards the back end of the season once the going got tough a little bit? And obviously there's, again, big turnover coming at Catalan in the off-season, so hopefully the people that come in will be more invested, and it looks like they might be. Luke Burgess is a Brit player that's coming in, so he may be more invested in doing well in the Super League, and of course Samo has experience in Super League as well, so there's an affinity for those guys there where there hasn't necessarily been in the past.
It did seem obviously like Al was looking forward to next season with the last minute or so of that review.
Absolutely.
Leaning that way.
Yeah, well, hopefully it is welcome to paradise for everybody down in Perpignan next year.
It really makes me want to go and watch a game with him next year.
Oh, I'll just go people watching, just drink a few beers.
Yeah, that's true, yeah.
Absolutely. Right, on to the Huddersfield Giants then. This is perhaps the first of the travesty seasons, if you like.
It is in terms of your prediction.
Absolutely. Well, I had them down in the top 3, Mark, and everything that they'd done the year before and their recruitment led me to believe that they would achieve that. You were less keen on them. You went for them finishing 8th in the top 8. However, a terrible season which saw their head coach Paul Anderson depart midway through to be replaced by Rick Stone, Sutton finishing 3rd in the qualifiers behind even the Leeds Centurions in that part of the competition. So they'll be in Super League next year with a lot of room to catch up on. In the Cup, we both had them as semi-finalists. They actually went out in the quarter-finals. Who is the fan that's got in touch with us on this one?
It's Paul Michael Craig getting in touch from down under, so we'll get an interesting take on someone who's developed his Huddersfield fandom whilst listening to the Super League pod almost.
There we go.
And we will see what he has to say.
Alright, good day lads, this is Paul Michael Craig, otherwise known as Paul Mac _78 on Twitter. First of all, let me just say thank you on behalf of all the other listeners. You guys give me something to look forward to each and every week. Very hard to keep up with Super League down here in Australia, so I found your podcast is like an amazing tool that I use each and every week. I don't think I've actually missed an episode since I started listening in season 1, probably halfway through season 1. But anyway, I'm doing a recording for my review of the Huddersfield Giants season. It hasn't been the greatest season, obviously, but going into the season I was actually quite positive. I had them to finish in the top 4, possibly losing a semi-final, but still overall a positive season. But even when early results went against us, we had a few close losses. I just thought it was only a matter of time before we turned them around. It didn't seem to work, though. It just seemed to be the story of our season. We just close result after close result, and then I think a change needed to be made. That change came when the owner decided to sack the coach, that Anderson, and I thought it was probably needed a bit of a shake-up, to be honest. But looking back, it was probably a few of the players needed to move on as well. There's an old adage in boxing that sometimes you watch a boxer get old in the ring. I kind of felt that way with Huddersfield this year. Bruff, Crabtree, great players, and two of the reasons why I actually support Huddersfield. I'm a big fan of both of theirs, but I just don't know. Sometimes, it was hard watching them. Like I said, when they're players that you actually really, really admire, but you just know they're well past their best. Anyway, so the season, we obviously finished in the middle eights. In the middle eights, yeah. So this was an exciting part of the season. It's something I really admire about the English Super League season. The system you have in place. It gives clubs from the lower tiers a chance to fight it up against the big boys. And we've seen the season with Lee moving up that it's not the impossible dream. But my highlights and lowlights of the season came both in the middle eights. The loss to Lee was some of the most pathetic rugby league I've ever watched in my life. I don't think I've ever been so angry watching a game of football. Just players refusing to tackle. And the highlight probably came a week or two later when they beat Leeds to more or less confirm third place in the middle eights, therefore securing their position in Super League. Players I enjoyed watching this season, obviously Leroy Kudjai. I've got a big rap on Leroy Kudjai. I'm sure he could handle the NRL no problem whatsoever. McGilvray is another one. Like I said, I'm a big fan of his. And another one, a little bit of obscure. I've only seen bits and pieces of him again because you don't see many Huddersfield games on TV here in Australia. Generally, you get the same 4 teams week in, week out. And I'm sure all the listeners know who exactly I'm talking about. But he's a young hooker called Cruz Leeming. I'm a very big rap on him. I think he's got a bit of class about him. A little bit more game time we might see. And also going into next season, I know Brough is there, and personally, I would like to see Briley take control of the side. But I've heard on the grapevine that Rick Stone is not a fan, which is a bit disappointing. But the other thing we're looking forward to is possibly the signing of Jake Mamo from the Newcastle Knights. I get he's a player I've got a bit of time for. He's a bit of an angry ant and can give away a penalty, but always plays with a bit of spark. And if he could actually be signed by Huddersfield Giants, I've got no doubt in the world he could very well be the next Luke Dawn. But that's it for me. Very short. I do apologise. Like I said, very hard doing a season review when you only see 4 or 5 games this season, but still enjoyed the season nonetheless. I'd like to say congrats to Mark for his beloved Wigan getting the title. And this is probably the only Australian that will be cheering on the Poms in the Four Nations. So good luck with that too, guys, and we'll see you next year.
Right, well, that was former International Listener of the Year, Paul Michael Craig. Paul, that's fabulous. Thank you so much for getting in touch. And don't apologise for anything. That was insightful, and it was really interesting to get, like you say, an outsider's perspective. Not an outsider, because he's legitimately a Huddersfield fan, but an outsider's perspective in terms of an Australian guy who watches ESL and has taken a club under his wing, and to hear his thoughts on it, because it feels like there's less filter with Paul on this one. Do you know what I mean? There's not quite the level of passionate bias that sometimes affects your day-to-day fans. So it was quite incisive, I thought, at times. And
definitely, and he seemed to grow in confidence as his bit went on. And
that's it. No starting your own podcast now, though.
I loved his voice,
absolutely. Bedtime story.
You can see why one of the clubs down under was wanting to get him on board as a ground announcer.
Well, I don't know if that's not necessarily a poor idea, because he chilled me right out. I wouldn't. I hope he G's him up.
At least when they leave at the end of the game, when they've lost, he'll be able to relax everyone if they're going out the gates.
Everything's all right, guys.
And I'm pretty sure the one England game he won't be cheering for us in is probably the Scotland game.
Well, yeah,
he's got roots, hasn't he? That's where his English or British heritage comes from.
Absolutely,
he's a Scottish dad, I think. Is that right?
I'm not sure both his parents are Scottish. They moved over there, but he's got split allegiances, I would say. What are your thoughts on what Paul had to say and on Huddersfield's season in general, Mark?
Well, I expected Huddersfield to not be a threat for Old Trafford this year, as you covered before we heard from Paul, but I didn't see them coming 12th after the regular season. Save for meeting an already safe Leeds in round 6 and the controversial drop goal in round 7 of the qualifiers, it could have been even worse for the Giants, really. That Leeds win was pivotal, so I think even though the Hull KR win was massive, and I know Paul thought that at the time, I think on reflection the Leeds game was just as big because how Leeds were dominating in the qualifiers. But no side can call on injuries as an excuse, can they, this year in 2016, really, when what Wigan did, what Castleford did, what Wakefield did with what they faced up to.
Yeah.
But the Giants, actually, they got their fair share and probably didn't gripe about it as much.
Well, I recall early in the season they played you on television and they'd been disseminated. This is, when they'd been, I won't say reduced, but they got Jamie Foster in on a short-term deal, and they would deploy a lot of youngsters up against you guys. And actually, in the first half of that game, they were the match of you as well, and it was in the second half that you guys pulled away. So even from early in the year, it was. It's not an excuse, but it's a contributing factor, isn't it?
Well, Luke Robinson, he was gone in the pre-season, I think, but the biggest issue was the prop department this year. Craig Hubie, he only got 8 games during the regular season, during the 23 rounds. Dan Smith only saw half as many, 4. So that's your second and third choice, or maybe in that range, certainly 2 of your top 4. Yeah. Mid-season signing Sebastian Ikahifo, he never got match fit, really. He only ran out in 4 of a possible 9 games before the split for him. so didn't get to have an impact there.
Did Ike not join them in? Was he not there at the start of the season? Did he not play and break his jaw and not realise he'd broken his jaw at one point?
It was mid-year. Yeah, he joined in about round 14. Obviously, he could have played in 9 games, so 15 would have been his first game. Right. He played 2, then was out for about a month or so. Played 2